Welcome to Studying Law Around the World. I'm Claudio Klaus. In each episode, I talk with lawyers, law students, and professors from different parts of the world to talk about legal education, careers, and what the profession looks like in real life. We talk about the hard parts, the surprises, and the decisions that shaped their paths. Whether you're planning to study abroad, thinking about working in another legal system, or just curious about how law works around the world, this podcast is for you. Today, I have the opportunity to be speaking with Lameck Kefala. Thank you so much for taking the time to be in the podcast today and to share a few of your thoughts. I appreciate it.
Well, Claudio, thank you so much for having me here.
Likewise, I really appreciate you taking the time and to take this opportunity for our listeners who are, listening to you for the first time. I want to ask you if you could introduce yourself and share a little bit about who you are and what you do these days.
Absolutely. If I ever ramble on, Claudio, please let me know. But to make a long story short, my name is Lameck Kefala. I'm a recruitment consultant for Smith Legal Search. As a way of a brief CV, if you will, I went to law school at the University of Ottawa. Soon after, I summered an article at Nixon, which was a lovely experience. And following that, I worked at a legal tech startup doing a lot of commercial contracting, your SaaS agreements, and everything in between. And at some point, I decided to make that switch over into recruitment land. And it's been 2 years since, and it's been a lot of fun. Made a lot of friends along the way.
Oh, that's amazing. Very, very excited to speak with you a little bit about, the Toronto market and what it means to be, a legal consultant. So yeah, you just said, moving from practicing law into recruitment. If I may ask you, a little bit of what prompted that shift and maybe what strengths from practice you believe that help you serve your candidates and clients right now.
Absolutely. So it's funny. It's multifaceted a little bit of how I landed into recruitment. I will say it started during the OCI process. At least my interest was piqued then. As you go through networking and get to know some of the student recruiters from these different firms, I found myself connecting very well with them, and I just found their position quite fascinating, as most of them were or are still practicing lawyers. And so I began inquiring just on a high level basis, and sort of they said to me, you practice for a few years and then you sort of like revisit that conversation then. And I said, well, no problem. So I was very interested and intrigued from the internal side of recruitment initially. And then while I was working at the tech startup, Smith Legal had a position open, and it said something along the lines of, are you an articling student or a new call who may be realizing that practice is not for them? And I said, well, this ad is quite literally speaking to me. I very much enjoyed law school and the academic side of the law. I didn't enjoy too much practicing. I felt I was very constrained to my computer. A lot of my work was just that, and there wasn't as much human connection to that felt enough for me, that was sufficient. And so um and so ultimately I decided to take that leap and interview for the position. And always sort of like going back to recruitment, I think about the idea of, would I regret this if I don't apply? And it felt very much a strong yes for me, that I would regret it if I at least did not consider it. And I had a conversation, and the rest is history. And I joined the team, and it's been amazing since. On the how did practice assist me, help me? I would say, every day, like, it can be as simple as understanding a little bit about practice areas and like what does the practice entail, and sort of understanding the level of responsibility and responsibility that an associate or a partner or legal counsel may have on a specific file. I'm not here to say that I'm an expert in all of them, but at least having that base understanding, so that I can be a bit of a ping pong match in terms of, I understand what you're saying. I think like what you're looking for is XYZ. And but it could be also, I've redlined a few employment offers alongside my candidates, where they found some language that perhaps wasn't the best, or they didn't necessarily like it. And so I've taken it together, the candidate and I together, we went at it and made some suggestions. And so, you see it here and there. And the last one on this. there's different school of thoughts. Some say, obviously the legal profession is one that's quite insular and insulated. And so when you are a recruiter that is also a lawyer, it helps in those conversations. That's dependent on who you ask, but I think generally it doesn't really help that much, but it is definitely a bonus for sure.
Amazing. I see that, supervising multiple practice areas, through, corporate finance, litigation, regulatory work. There's a lot of different areas there. And I wanted to know, what are you seeing in the Toronto market this winter? Is there a
Yeah.
demand rising? Where is it flat? What are some of the updates you got to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of my favorite questions to answer. And obviously, it varies based on the quarter, based on the time of the season. I would say 2025, and I think you've probably heard this many times, it was quite a choppy year. And frankly, I would argue that it's been a choppy season from 2023. I remember my time doing articling and sort of looking for opportunities following my articling, and it was quite difficult. And labor and employment and litigation were the dominant practice areas. I would say, especially litigation, the last 2 years has seen an increase in demand that was quite unprecedented, and so as well as restructuring and insolvency. But going back into what we're seeing right now, so. As I mentioned, 2025 was quite the choppy year. Litigation was still reigning supreme for the first half, and then we saw a bit of a shift occurring around April, where we started seeing more corporate M&A associates making laterals. Granted, and I'm sure if it's been a pivot from private practice to in-house. And so largely, a lot of firms were quite happy with this result, as it would allow them to, as associates were not billing and the deal flow was not as expected. They had associates that were underutilized. And so this was a very welcome sort of like, exodus, if you will. And so now what we're seeing is that deal flow is upticking. And so some firms are moving early in, and because they understand that with the demand in deal flow rising and many of their associates having made the pivot in-house, their current bench strength is not as good as they would like it to be. So some firms are moving early. We're seeing that corporate M&A has definitely been at the forefront and sort of like what firms are looking for. And I would say other areas to look out for this year, project finance has been one of the busiest subsection of banking and finance. Securitization. So banking and finance in general, as well as the regulatory side of the practice. And then I would say infrastructure and P3 is one that's curiously rising. We've seen sort of like the budget for 2020, the budget released by the federal government, with a strong emphasis on building more and building more in Canada. To that end, you're seeing some firms sort of like reshifting their groups and having specialized groups. Some already existed, and perhaps they're just bolstering them more. So you're seeing some marketing efforts, you're seeing some more interest from firms to like get deepening their bench or creating an entire new group. So I would say like it's one area that has not necessarily seen a massive uptick, but one that I would want to watch closely. And on the litigation side, we've sort of said it time and time again over the last year, that is that window tightens. The window where like on a practice area is so busy and so in demand will eventually die off. It's part of cycles. And so we warned sort of like the litigation associates who were interested in lateraling that the opportunities will be far and few in between in the coming year. And that is sort of what we're seeing as of now. So the litigation boutiques are still in the hunt, but commercial litigation as a whole, at the national level, is just not as prevalent. And then lastly, I would say watch out for construction litigation for sure, if you're specific on the commercial side. And then I would say international trade, I think, will be another one that is going to be quite in demand, as well as competition. And so that's sort of like my overview. Obviously, just like they're just projections, and so like you can never hold me to them. But like based on what we've been seeing, I would say if you're a corporate M&A associate, either capital market securities or even private M&A, ECBC, anything like that in that sphere would likely be quite busy. And infrastructure and banking and finance, so would be my top three picks.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for the quite comprehensive update on what the market's looking like. Always much appreciated. And since you mentioned this in the beginning, I think you said something about, some kind of an exodus, leaving firms and going into different positions. So I think that that's something that comes to mind to many associates, weighing whether in-house, private practice, what makes sense in which stage of their careers and what they want to do out of their careers. And I wanted to know, if you're talking to, 2021 to 2024 calls, how should they think through, the timing, the skills, the compensation? I think there's a lot of points here that you're quite the person to talk about. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think some of it is embedded, sort of like even in law school. I recall, you go to Bay Street, you go for 3 years, and then you go in house. I always jokingly say that Bay Street is a little bit like the McDonald's of corporate lawyers. Is like that McDonald's is the first job you get out of high school. It looks good on your resume. It teaches you a lot, and then you just kind of like go wherever you wish. There is some truth to that. At the same time, people need to I always sort of ask the question why in-house and why now? Because it's relevant. Is it a question of billables? Like a lot of people are tied to their billables. They don't like the unpredictability that private practice provides, which is absolutely fair. It's hard to plan around your day to day, but as well as like outlook for the next quarter or the next half of year. So at the same time, what people often fail to realize is that in-house is an entirely different world, provided depending on industry, depending on your role. So there will be certain industries that will pay closer to private practice, but at the same time, they have higher expectations in terms of like what your day-to-day looks like. So it's not always a lofty, and frankly, it almost never is a lofty 9 to 5. And the practice also changes. So you're no longer a revenue generator. You're effectively a cost center. So you need to provide effective legal risk, understand effective legal advice by understanding the different legal risks that a company is willing to be subject to, and that involves having conversations with different departments within the company and really be embedded in it. And so oftentimes people don't realize, like, you don't need a 5-page memo. They just want to understand whether or not this can be achieved, and if not, how can we achieve it, and what is the risk that we may be subject to. So that's the part that people tend to not fully appreciate, as opposed to, and the other thing when it goes to in-house is you do end up punting sort of like the work when it gets very exciting and very sophisticated over to external counsel. So if you're the type of person that genuinely enjoys tackling multi-sophisticated type of issues and transactions, then I would really consider where in-house sits for you. And so I frequently have conversations with associates that will say, well, we completed the transaction and then we just kind of like sent them over and we don't see the implementation. And so that's a person that actually may be good for in-house. Like they want to actually see out what the result of that, whatever legal transaction or legal disputes they were part of. So that's someone that usually tells me that it may be more ready than others. Because if it's just being tied to the billables and like sort of like the pressures of private practice, there are alternatives within the private practice sphere that may work better for you as opposed to work going directly in-house. In terms of timing, it depends. It always depends. I hate to give the lawyer answer to this, but effectively, the more junior you are, the more challenging it becomes to make that transition in-house. And what are you want to be able to really get into. The best way to explain this is like you're somewhat cutting yourself off from private practice if you do decide to go in very early. And so like, are you okay with that decision of letting go of this private practice world, as it is quite challenging to get back into it, especially when you're more junior. And so I always say, like, with as long as you can withstand private practice, my advice is to stay as long as you can, because no other, like, in-house is not going to give you the same level of speed of execution, variety of files that that private practice would otherwise provide you with, as well as the training and just the hours, right? So that's sort of like my big answer. I hope I touched on all the points, but please feel free to remind me of any other questions that I may have missed in that question of yours.
No, I really appreciate that. It helps a lot to know what the fit looks like and that maybe that's not a natural transition for most people. It really depends on personality, on what they enjoy doing and all of that. Also, still kind of on the situation of personality and the kind of work you like doing and all of that. I noticed that, some of the searches and that have been advertised sit somewhat close to the C-suite level. And I'm very curious, about what in a way separates those lawyers who thrive in a business facing role versus those who might struggle with this transition, or even that, as a recruiter or a consultant, you might tell them, hey, maybe this is not a good fit for you, or maybe you choose not to recommend this specific person to this kind of role. What are some thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think when it comes to those type of role where you're sitting very closely to C-suite, I think you have to learn how to do more with less. And sort of like going back to the idea of, you're a cost center, right? So can you provide quite effective and quick business and legal advice to the stakeholders? So that is something that some lawyers often struggle with, especially if they're coming straight out of private practice, or perhaps even say like government positions where the pace is a lot slower and the process is a lot more academic. The same goes for private practice, frankly. Like if someone has to make a report, they're gonna make that report quite extensive. But at the C-suite, sort of like the chief legal officers or those type of roles, they require you to do like again more with less. So like if someone asks you, I need this, can we do this? Quick turnaround. Can you also command the ship? If you have people that report to you, do you know how to boost morale, keep people up, and also advocate for your department, right? So again, going back, when you're in private practice, you get a lot of like nice little nifty perks, right? So like you'll get the Uber after hours, or you get certain different things that happen that are otherwise not necessarily always available in-house, right? So can you, as a leader of your legal team, can you go and say, we need to add another junior, we need to have a budget allocated to like, fun nights out, whatever it may be, right? Are you able to sort of like stand up and have that kind of personality where you can go up to the CEO, because that is often who you end up reporting to, and sort of saying, these are the needs of my team. And so those are the few things that I try to look for, a bit of moxie, if you will. And so that's, aside from being an excellent legal practitioner, do you have that type of personality where it's like you don't run away from conflict, you face it head on, and you try to also provide effective solutions?
Amazing. Very, very, very interesting. I'm trying to think here about, kind of digging into those ideas of personality and all of that. And I think there's something very interesting that I've seen you posting about before, and that is spoken somewhat frequently. It's about, when is usually a good time to make moves, when you are most, marketable, when the market, wants to absorb people. So overall speaking, what are some thoughts on, if you're planning on leaving a law firm, for example, which year should you be looking into that? When is, a good time when you're not too junior, but also not too senior? Um,
Yeah.
tell me more.
I mean, I can talk about this topic for hours because it's one of my, and again, lawyer answer, it depends. But I would say the sweet spot is generally the 3 to 5 year mark. And so the reason for that is you are still junior enough that you can sort of absorb the culture of a different firm or a different company, whatever it may be. And so you can still like make a run for partner if that's something that you're interested in. And more importantly, firms at that point, at that stage, still hire for ceiling. So yes, they want sort of like the core competencies, but they're willing and open to maybe close one eye if there's something that may be missing, because they could see the potential of your talent. And so the 3 year mark is a good sort of like a placeholder, because by that year, articling, you don't know nothing, and you're not expected to know anything. First year, you're expected to know everything, but you know nothing. Second year, you start becoming a little bit more comfortable, but you're also becoming more comfortable with the idea of knowing nothing. In your third year, you're finally in a place where you have a little bit more autonomy over files. You sometimes even have a junior reporting to you or an articling student. And so you have a level of familiarity that makes you a bit more confident. And you've seen sort of like the type of documents and files that are frequent. And so that puts you in a position where if they were to take you and plug you into another in a different environment, in a different world, it's not like you're starting from zero. And so that's sort of why that third year mark is often like the benchmark. Granted, there are associates can leave earlier or after or before, but that third year mark usually puts you in a good spot. And then, there are different considerations, right? So for instance, the fifth year mark is the opposite of that, because by fifth year, especially if you're intending on making a private practice lateral, firms may be wondering, well, why is he at this point, at this stage in his career, why are they not making a push for a partner within their own firm? There's sort of like the goalpost shifts in terms of competencies, and it makes it more challenging and doesn't give you the same level of options as you would if you were a third or fourth year. And once you get into the sixth and the seventh, it generally becomes increasingly more challenging unless it's a counsel position or there's a promise of partnership on the other end. So in generally, there may be like, at least some form of BD involved. Are you building some kind of book? Do you have some kind of clients, even at sort of like a smaller level? And so the sort of like the goalpost and the benchmarks that the firms use tip heavily sort of like in favor of real proof of evidence that you're exceeding and expectations within your current firm, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. It really does.
Yeah, and for in-house, I would say same thing. 3 to 5 is great. For in-house, like post 5, yeah, I think you'd be able to find positions. And then if anything, you may be able to find positions with titles that are like greater than legal counsel, perhaps senior legal counsel. If it's a small team, you may even get like a higher position, especially with the more seniority that you have. So that is a little bit different. And that is why I say it depends.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's amazing. Thank you so much for explaining that so nicely. If I may ask you, kind of leading towards the end of our conversation today, I'm wondering, is there, some kind of step or some kind of thing that associates could do, or maybe an action that they could take throughout this month to create opportunities and options for the next semester or for, Quill 4 later this year? What are some things that you would, do or recommend to like open more options?
Yeah, I would talk to every single person that you can. And like honestly, like for instance, very much loved sort of what you've done with the University of Toronto, celebrating the 75th anniversary. That's great, right? Like because you also have a point of a reason for the reach out, right? But at the same time, lawyers love to take a chat, especially if you're junior. And I say you won't have the same amount of time and the same amount of sort of like novelty to you than your first 3 years of practice, even as an articling student. And so that is when people are willing to hear you out. And that is what, and I always say, just send the email or send the LinkedIn message and follow up. Following up, I'd say like it's half the game. Oftentimes these people are busy. Their inbox is probably a mess. So make it a habit of following up, because it's not that they don't like you, it's probably like you've caught them at a bad time, and the second, third follow-up will probably be a time where they're maybe in a better place where they can answer. So always follow up, have as many conversations as you can, and I genuinely mean that, because first of all, it allows you to really refine how you view your practice and what you're doing. And second, it gives you an opportunity to genuinely understand what people are doing. And it could be in your practice area or a practice area that you're interested in or a whole different one. And so have as many conversations as you can, especially in your articling, not just within the bounds of your firm, but outside of it as well. So that is my best advice. And I would say treat it almost as working out. Like you want to do it in a way where I say, have an Excel spreadsheet, have like the people that you've reached out to. When was the first time that you reached out to? Did they get back to you? Did they not get back to you? Then have a follow-up, right? And so like treat it almost as a job. because nothing else will open more opportunities than that, really having as many conversations as possible. And then my other one is sort of like branding. And it's so funny, like I despised LinkedIn for the longest time. I found it so cringy. I thought, I always jokingly say I'm a LinkedIn warrior. But there is a way to use your voice, and nothing has the same level of reach that LinkedIn otherwise has. And it doesn't always have to be an astute observation on a recent Supreme Court of Canada hearing or the sexiest transaction that occurred in the first quarter. It could just be very simple, sort of like where I got my coffee or what like very basic, very personal. Those actually tend to be the ones that do quite well. But like allowing yourself to be visible, that's sort of the name of the game. The more visible you are, the more opportunities are open to you. And I've seen that with the associates that tend to be quite high performing, that they will have some form of voice on LinkedIn, whether it's purely academic or whether it's just like a mix. Those are the ones that want to be visible and go out of their way to do so. But that's sort of like my answer. I hope that was exhaustive.
No, that was amazing. Really appreciate you taking the time. Really appreciate all the advice. And thank you all for tuning into today's episode.
Yeah. Thank you so much, guys, and thank you for having me. This was so much fun. I hope it was
Absolutely.
helpful.
Absolutely was. Thank you.